Good morning. My name is Ryan Erickson Kulas. I am the Programs Director for the Michelson 20mm Foundation. And today we'll be discussing our upcoming Spark Grants Open Educational Resources cycle. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. First, I will give you all a bit of background about the Michelson 20mm Foundation. And then I will discuss the Spark Grant program particularly. I'll walk through what the application process looks like. I will highlight previous awardees, so you all have a sense of the type of work that we have funded in the past. And then I will leave time at the end for a Q&A. If you do have questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box. And again, at the end of this presentation, I will go back and review those. Unfortunately, I'm not skilled enough to be able to multitask and see the questions as well as present. Excuse me. So we will go ahead and get started. One thing I just wanted to let you all know is that this is being recorded. We will be sending out a recording of this to everyone who is registered. We'll also be posting a link to this deck as well for your review. So the Michelson 20mm Foundation was founded and is funded by Dr. Gary Michelson. Dr. Michelson is a retired orthopedic surgeon who made his fortune in inventing medical devices and then patenting those devices. Since then, he has retired and devoted himself to philanthropy. The Michelson 20mm Foundation is his higher education foundation, but he also operates two other foundations, one in and around animal welfare, that's the Michelson Found Animals organization, and then the Michelson Medical Research Foundation. Dr. Michelson got his start thinking about higher education really on the issue of textbook affordability. A little over 10 years ago, he saw a story in a local newspaper where students, highly qualified, academically sound, were unable to complete their degree at a local community college simply due to the high cost of textbooks. And he saw that indeed faculty were actually purchasing those books for students out of their own pocket. At that time, he actually set up a scholarship fund for those students so that they could purchase those books, but quickly realized that that didn't address the root of the issue. So that's what got us into the open educational resources space. And actually, we kicked off that work with a gift of just over $1 million to OpenStax, which I'm sure as many of you know is one of the largest nonprofit OER publishing platforms in the country. So that gift was, again, about a decade ago. And since we've really grown the organization to not only encompass open educational resources, but a variety of other initiatives. Our goal at 20mm is to create a more just world. And we do that by investing in entrepreneurs, change makers, and policy in order to scale innovation. We want to have all humanity be able to achieve their missions. So how do we do that? And what exactly do we do? Well, the first area of work that I'll talk about is the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. As I mentioned, Dr. Michelson made his fortune in inventing and then patenting those inventions. And so he's passionate about bringing intellectual property education to the masses. And he does that through the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. We've actually created an entire course focused on this that institutes of higher education can take and adapt as needed. We have an online Udemy platform as well. But Dr. Michelson really wants students, entrepreneurs, to be able to capitalize on their IP similar to how he did. We also do work in the impact investing space. So these are generally for-profit companies that we provide capital to, and they're primarily focused within the ed tech sector as well as future of work. One of these organizations that you all may be familiar with is Learner. as they're pretty prolific within the open educational resources space. Again, though, all of our investing is really done with the mission in mind of increasing access and affordability for students. The initiatives that primarily focus on higher education, of course, is open educational resources, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I wanted to highlight some of this other work that we do. Our digital equity initiative is looking to bridge the digital divide for post-secondary students within California, and we do that through a variety of different means. We actually just at the end of earlier this year, had a Spark grant cycle solely focused around that initiative. There we funded research as well as innovative technologies in order to bridge the digital divide. We also host a series of convenings called Connecting California, where we bring together thought leaders to share out their thinking as to how to address this issue. Our Smart Justice Initiative looks at the intersection of the higher education system and the criminal justice system. And we look to provide both people who are formerly incarcerated as well as people who are currently incarcerated opportunities to access higher education. We're also very involved in workforce development for people who have been involved in the criminal justice system as well. And then our Student Basic Needs Initiative, where we look to remove barriers that students often face when it comes to completing their degree. And that is done through research, as well as technological innovations. One of the portfolio companies in our impact investing work is an organization called Edquity that is looking to dramatically decrease the amount of time, red tape, and hassle that students have to go through in order to receive an emergency aid grant or an emergency aid scholarship. But why you all are here today is our open educational resources work. Our goal is to increase the number of courses and the number of faculty that are utilizing OER within higher education. And we do that because we want students to be able to not just have an affordable learning experience, but also one that is equitable, one that is culturally relevant, and one that is high quality. And so again, starting 10 years ago, we've been thinking and learning in this space, and we've been able to partner with some great organizations to really improve this experience for students, and especially when it comes to the instructional materials that they're utilizing and that faculty are utilizing. So after that kind of overview of our organization, I'd like to talk specifically about the Spark Grant Program. So we look to fund highly impactful initiatives that would not be possible if you have to wade through a traditional grant decision-making timeline. We commit to making a decision on all applications within 15 business days of our portal closing. So what that means is, and we'll talk about this a bit, but our timeline is we will open the call for proposals on June 2nd, and then we will close the call for proposals on June 23rd. So within 15 days, if you apply on June 23rd, if you wait till the last day, which I would not recommend, you will receive a decision, final decision as to whether we're going to be funding you or not within about 3 weeks. I will say, if you apply earlier, let's say you are in, you get everything prepared, you're really eager, and you apply on June 2nd, we may be able to make a decision before the cycle were to close. Again, but however, it just kind of depends on what the pipeline looks like. But definitely would encourage you to apply early if possible. But again, all decisions will be made within 15 days of the call for proposals. So we're looking to fund programs that are based in the United States, nonprofits, as well as educational institutions. And we're focused on organizations that are doing work in California. We realize that there is a high need around the country for support of this type of work. However, in order to effectively utilize our resources, as well as to save time and energy of nonprofits that we just would not be able to fund, we want it to be very upfront that we are really focused on making an impact here in California. The other thing that I want to share, as I know that there is a tremendous desire for funding for content development, grants to faculty to produce OER content. At this time, we are not going to be utilizing our resources to fund content development. They are, sorry, my neighbor is a bit loud outside. So content development is something that we feel is not the best use of our dollars. So evaluation framework, what do we look at when we are looking to evaluate proposals that come in? And I should share just kind of some high level numbers. For the last funding cycle that we ran for our digital equity initiative, we had approximately 55 proposals come in during the course of that cycle. We ended up awarding 5 grants. I think that we will most likely be awarding somewhere between 3 and 5 grants for this cycle as well. So I just want to kind of frame what our pipeline has looked like in the past. So here are the 6 dimensions of evaluation that we look at, and we will dive into each of these to touch base on what they are. So the first is baseline criteria. Our grants are up to $25,000. So we ask organizations to submit what they are seeking in terms of dollar amounts. And we also ask organizations to submit a project. We are generally a project-based funder when it comes to our Spark grant process. So we won't be giving dollars out for general operating expenses. Really what we're looking for is something that is kind of milestone focused. Perhaps it's a new partnership. Perhaps it is something that has been, proven out effectively already, and you're looking for dollars to be able to scale the work. Perhaps it's a new idea or a new concept that you're looking to do a pilot program on. Those are the types of work that we would be interested in supporting. One thing to note, we are open to having our dollars be part of a larger project. So perhaps there is a project that you're working on that is, $100,000, $50,000, whatever that number is. We are open to having our dollars support that larger work as well. We would just want to get a better sense of, 1, what our dollars would specifically be deployed for, and 2, what the other funding streams for the project currently look like. So focus area alignment, and I think that this is the real sort of meat and potatoes of what we are looking to fund. So what we do is we ask organizations to select a focus area that their project would impact. I would say in rare circumstances, we'll have projects submitted that will hit multiple focus areas. But generally, we see that organizations kind of select one of these focus areas. So the first focus area that I'll talk about is tenure and promotion. At the foundation, I think what we see and have been thinking about ways to incentivize faculty to adopt, utilize open educational resources. And I think what we see as one of the more interesting opportunities and potential for incentivizing that is the tenure and promotion process. So we'd be very interested in evaluating proposals that are looking for ways to incorporate OER within that process. The other thing that we're very passionate about is kind of raising awareness around the issue of automatic textbook billing. Some of you may know that as some of the more flowery language, like inclusive access, first day. But we feel like these programs have some troubling trends and have the ability to really impact students and faculty, and not necessarily always in the most positive ways. So we'd be really interested in projects that are sort of focused around bringing awareness to this issue. We see it as fairly opaque right now for the average person who is not immersed in the space. So we feel the more that we can educate people about automatic textbook billing, the easier it will be to ensure that policymakers make decisions that are in the best interests of students and faculty. And these are policymakers, both within legislative bodies, but also within systems of higher education, who are often making the decisions around automatic textbook billing. The next focus area is utilizing OER to provide actively anti-racist and more culturally responsive learning environments. I'm sure many of you are aware, but I think one of the huge benefits and value of open educational resources is its ability to be adaptable and to be able to create content where students can see themselves reflected in. So we'd be very interested in receiving proposals focused in and around that area of work. And then the next three is first research-based. So we're really interested in building more evidence around, specifically here in California, how OER and ZTC are impacting student success. I think for so long, the metric that has been utilized is cost savings and how those dollars can benefit student, and we totally understand that frame of reference, but I think we also are very interested in seeing how students' grades are being affected by OER or ZTC programs. For those of you who aren't familiar, zero textbook cost degree programs are entire pathways built out, generally within community colleges here in California, although we've seen them in other institutions as well, where a student does not have to incur the cost of a textbook through in the entire time that they're able to get their degree. Obviously, open educational resources are often used within those programs, but not exclusively OER. So again, we're really interested in sort of building a body of research around those programs, because we feel like, again, that evidence of this is impacting student success, this is causing them to, utilizing OER allows them to graduate quicker, allows them to transfer, allows them to, be successful in career outcomes, would be really, really valuable when it comes to convincing faculty to adopt, convincing policymakers to invest in open educational resources. The next focus area is something that we've been sort of thinking through extensively, and that is, giving faculty the tools in order to feel comfortable in making the switch to OER. And so we're really interested in understanding professional development opportunities that can impact that. And I think primarily we are interested in models that would be able to engage faculty statewide or have the potential to pilot somewhere and then scale statewide. I will say the type of proposal that I think would not be of interest to the grant committee would be if one particular college were to say, we want $25,000 to train X number of faculty on our campus. We would really want to be able to see more if you're working with another campus, or if it's a district-wide or multi-district-wide initiative, or we're running this professional development program at our campus, but it's unique. It is something that hasn't necessarily been done before, and we want to prove out this model on our campus and then share the professional development opportunity statewide. And obviously with open licensing, that's a little easier to do. And then the last focus area that we have is improving efforts around data collection. So one of the things that we've seen that has been lacking to date is high quality metrics around adoption. Where are faculty adopting open educational resources? I think oftentimes that data is very siloed. And so if there is data on a campus, it is not being shared. But we're really interested in getting a better overview of, what is the percentage of faculty in California that are using open educational resources? What are the disciplines that are, highest in adoption rates? Because I think once we have that data, we can, make better decisions as a community around where additional support is needed. Again, if you have any specific questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. At the end of this presentation, I will go through and do my best to answer. And if I don't have an answer, I can always follow up with you all offline. So the third dimension of evaluation is, what is the impact of this work? Again, we want to get a better sense of, okay, we're going to give you these dollars to complete this project around one of these focus areas. Well, how many individuals will be impacted? And this can be both in the short term as well as in the long term. And again, it's going to be very project specific. In an ideal case, what do you hope to achieve? And in a worst case scenario, what is the minimum that you think? How likely is the project to be successful is something that we'll be evaluating as well. And I think, it's great to say, oh, we are going to impact, I'm just going to throw out a random number, 1,000 students by this work, or we are going to impact 200 faculty that will then impact X amount of students. But one of the things that we really want to have a good sense of is how an organization or institution will actually measure that impact. So we ask organizations to propose metrics of success for the project, and then we as a grant committee sort of evaluate those potential metrics. We also want to get a better sense of the project timeline. I would say generally for our Spark grant funding, we look to fund work that will, come to fruition within a 6 to 18 month time frame. And that's obviously a wide range. I would say most of our grant periods last roughly a year. But again, we ask organizations to submit what the timeline of their project would be. And then we're looking at just long-term sustainability, both of potentially the organization or the project. So we want to get a better sense of in your proposal, who's the current team, who's been working on it, why are you all the right team to be doing this type of work? If you're a nonprofit, what are your revenue streams right now? How do you sort of sustain the work that you do? Because obviously we want to be working and partnering with organizations that are here for the long haul. And then the final dimension of evaluation is scalability. So we are very, very interested in looking at work that can scale. So, we're going to be much, and I referenced this kind of a bit earlier, but we're going to be much more interested in projects and proposals that are submitted that have a larger impact than just one campus or one community. So it's really important for us to have a better sense of how work can be scaled up. And again, even if it is a pilot program that is being piloted, sharing with us how you see that pilot being able to scale beyond. And again, this doesn't have to be with our grant dollars, but we want to get a better sense of sort of, if we were to spark this pilot, what is the long-term trajectory of the work? So we'll get into a bit more about the process now. So we will have a portal open for letters of inquiry starting on June 2nd. And if you go to our Spark Grant webpage, which the link is right there, that will, and maybe my colleague Rachel can drop it in the chat for you all as well. But that will be the portal. There'll be a button right at the top that'll say submit submit a proposal. And through there, you will be able to submit. One thing that I will mention is if you do go to that website right now, at the very top, you will actually be able to download copies of both the LOI as well as the application. So if you're interested in sort of getting a better sense of the specific questions that we would be asking organizations, you can start reviewing those now. Those went live yesterday. You just won't have the opportunity to submit something until June 2nd. One thing to mention is we do utilize a grant management platform that is Submittable. So in order to utilize Submittable, you'll need to create an account. One thing that we've seen is that sometimes communications that we send out via Submittable are lost in people's spam or blocked. So we would highly recommend that you whitelist Submittable in your email client. There'll actually be a link to explain that process when you do submit an LOI. And our communication will sort of go out and be done in Submittable. So if we were to advance you, if we were to ask more questions, all of that we would be doing through our grant management platform. I am competent with technology, but by no means an expert. So if you're having technical issues with Submittable, something isn't submitting, something isn't saving, you're unable to access the platform, I would highly recommend that you reach out to support@submittable.com for an email. Obviously, you can feel free to copy me on those just so that I'm sort of aware of the issue. But more likely than not, I'm not going to be the person who's going to be able to solve those problems for you. This is a look at the grant committee. So this will be the team that will sort of be evaluating proposals. Obviously, you have myself, and then the other members of the committee are Phil Kim, who's the CEO of Michelson 20mm and has been with Dr. Michelson for over a decade. And then Myra Lombera, who is our COO and has been on board for close to maybe over 8 years now. I guess I should have mentioned this at the start, but I've been with the organization for about 2.5 years. So kind of getting a sense of the process of evaluation and sort of what the milestones along from when you submit to when you would potentially have a final decision. So after you submit your LOI via the Submittable portal, we will do an initial assessment of that. The LOI is very straightforward. It is approximately really a 500-word abstract around what the project is. Our goal is to make this as low a bar to sort of entry as possible. So in the initial LOI, we don't try to clutter it with a ton of different questions, but really it is 500 words. What is the project? What are you hoping to achieve? Who are you hoping to impact? What is the timeline? And then, of course, there's some, information around like, what's your organization? Where are you located? What is your phone number? But really, it's, that 500-word abstract. Within 6 business days of your LOI being submitted, we will notify you if you're going to be moving forward in the process. If you do move forward in the process, that's when you'll be asked to complete a full application. Again, both copies of the LOI as well as the full application are available on our Spark Grant website for download right now. So if you want to get a sense of specifically what is being asked for, you can take a look at that. If proposals advance to a full application, one of the things that we will do is we will ask very specific questions based on what you submitted in your LOI. So as you'll see, obviously those questions aren't on the application that you can download right now because we don't know what the proposal is yet. Generally, that is somewhere between 3 to 7 questions, and that is just questions that the grant committee has based on what was submitted in the LOI. After you complete a full application, we'll review and assess that, and then most likely we will have a finalist conversation with organizations just to ask any lingering questions that we may have. Those are generally 60 minutes. In terms of, I guess, attrition rate, for lack of a better term, I would say generally we see about 25 to 30% of proposals advance forward into a full application. And again, we don't want to waste organizations' time. We know that you all are doing incredibly difficult jobs, and time is often a tight commodity. And so we really try to only advance proposals to a full application if we feel confident that we would be interested in potentially funding them. We're not just going to advance a proposal to kind of I don't know, keep the conversation going unless we feel strongly like, oh yes, this might be one of the final things that we consider. Again, as I mentioned, we are committed to making a final decision on the entire awardee cohort within 15 business days of our call for proposals closing. So within 15 business days of June 23rd, if I'd done my homework correctly, I would have had a date for you around that. But that's when we will sort of notify everyone about sort of, yes, we will be funding you, or no, we will not be funding you. If you are a visual learner, here is a visual representation. But essentially LOI is received, reject or move forward, full application, finalist call, and then final decision is made. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. I'm going to review some of our past Spark grantees, just so that you have a better sense of the type of work that we have funded in the past. All of these are available on that Spark Grant website. So if you go to that website and you scroll down, you'll see a collection of logos of organizations that we have funded in the past. If you click on those logos, they will bring you to blogs that talk about each specific grant. So if you, again, want to do some more digging around sort of the type of work, but I wanted to share a few quick highlights. I think we funded close to 25, 30 at this point. But I won't be sharing all 25 to 30 today. Again, just about 5 or so. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is U.S. Public Interest Research Group. So we funded them to produce a report sort of analyzing textbook industry's automatic billing framework. This report came out in February of 2020. Since that report has been released, it has been cited numerous times by advocates within the space. There are multiple lawsuits were condensed into a class action lawsuit against textbook publishers. And this report was sort of cited within that lawsuit. And this report has spurred policymakers here in California, in Texas, elsewhere, to really critically evaluate this framework and see if there are protections needed for students. And I know that there's legislation that has been introduced both in California as well as in Texas and a few other states kind of focus specifically on this. So that's a type of example where there was research that impacted the space. We felt that this underlying research could be used as a tool for advocates in the future, and was something that really worked out beautifully. It's actually one of the grants that I am most proud of being able to have supported. Another OER-centric Spark grant, and these first two are OER-centric Spark grants that we've given out, and the rest are sort of not focused on OER, but I think still good representation of the type of work that we're interested in funding, was to ISKME. This was actually done during our COVID Spark grant cycle, where we wanted to provide resources initially, like right when the pandemic hit. I think this was in April-ish of 2020. Our grant funded the production of 2 guidebooks as well as a series of webinars. And those resources were focused on how to incorporate OER into this swift transition to remote learning that everyone is doing, and giving both faculty as well as campus administrators sort of the tools to be able to do that. So again, it is something that, a resource that had you know, the potential to impact many throughout the state. It was really a great partnership to create a well-needed resource. The next organization that I'll talk about is the Education Trust West. They are actually one of the few organizations that we've been able to give a couple of Spark grants to. The first Spark grant that we gave them was focused on the development of a financial aid awareness toolkit. So legislation at the time had been recently passed in California that said that all high school seniors who, in order to graduate, they needed to go through some sort of educational program about the FAFSA and the California DREAM Act, with the idea being that if they were to, you know, learn about these, they would be more likely to complete them and therefore more likely to transition into higher education. What we funded was, or the need that EdTrust West educated us on, was that, you know, school districts, teachers, guidance counselors needed the resources to be able to actually provide that education. And so that's what that toolkit did. The second grant that we gave to EdTrust West was again in our COVID round. And it was, you know, looking at institutions of higher education and getting a better understanding of what they are doing to support students as they transition to remote learning and as they were dealing with the digital divide. So they surveyed students to get a better sense of the needs that they were experiencing during the initial months of COVID. And then they also created a digital map that illustrated each institution within California and what were the gaps in and around digital access, implementation of distance learning. And again, our goal in funding that is to uncover learnings and uncover needs that then policymakers can sort of drive change around. This grant to UCI was focused on our Smart Justice Initiative. And if you remember, I mentioned that earlier, that's the intersection of the criminal justice system and the higher education system. Our funding supported the first ever bachelor's degree granting program within the UC system in a California state prison. So people who are incarcerated via this program can earn a bachelor's degree in the UC system, which is something that, you know, prior to this program being started, was not possible. Again, this is a great example of, obviously, our $25,000 is not the entirety of the operating budget of this work, but it was, you know, a spark to the program and allowed that organization and that work to sort of begin and then hopefully to attract other financial support. And then we also gave a grant to the CSULB, Cal State Long Beach, and this was focused around our student basic needs work. Cal State Long Beach had identified a certain population of pregnant and parenting students that they wanted to support. And so in the work, they are building out a best practice model and toolkit as to how campuses can be friendly to pregnant and parenting students. That includes an ally training curriculum that's being built out that's going to be implemented at the campus. This is a really good example of, you know, work that a need was identified on one particular campus, but this resource is then going to be shared with the CSU Chancellor's Office and disseminated across the system so that other campuses have access to that resource and can sort of employ the practices that were developed at CSULB. And then the last grant that I'll mention is a grant that we gave to the Academic Senate of the California Community College System, as well as the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And that was to produce training materials, modules, and then conduct the first ever statewide training for all faculty who teach in a prison setting within the CCC system. And the goal, COVID willing, is to have that training be occurring later this year. But again, our dollars sort of came in early and helped to seed that. They've since gotten additional grant funding to support the work, but a really great example of one, sort of our funds being combined with other funds, and then two, thinking about how to do work at scale that can impact faculty statewide as opposed to just kind of only at one campus. So that is kind of my spiel for today. If you have any specific questions that you have, obviously, please drop them in the Q&A. I'm going to hopefully be able to pull up the Q&A effectively. If I don't get to your question, or if, because I have a hard stop at 11, if you want to follow up with me via email, it's just ryan@20mm.org, ryan@20mm.org. I'm also happy to have conversations with individuals and organizations prior to people submitting a grant proposal. So if you want to have a quick chat and to talk through, hey, I think that we might submit a project that does X, I'm happy to provide you with some thinking on our end, saying either I'm not sure that would be of interest to the grant committee, and hopefully sort of then saving you all some time before really digging into some building out the LOI. Or I could provide some feedback along the lines of, yes, that is actually really interesting. Please make sure that you include X, Y, and Z so that we have a holistic picture. So definitely not mandatory to have those conversations, but happy to for those that it would be helpful for. So again, if you have specific questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I tested this the other day and it worked, but now I can't see the Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Rachel, if you don't mind, maybe just dropping my email in the chat. That way people can still have access to that. And then hopefully when I stop sharing my screen, I'll be able to see the Q&A. Oh, yeah, okay. Q&A has popped up. Got nervous there for a second. Okay. So I'm just going to read these in the order that I see them. Research that is already completed or research that would be conducted, eventually published in a peer review journal, question mark. I'm not quite sure what that question is getting at. I would say research that would be, I think, yeah, we'd probably be more interested in research that would be conducted. If there is research that is already completed and maybe there's just a need for funds to share out that research, that may be of something of interest, but that one, maybe if you want to give me a little more detail via email, I'm happy to respond. Is the foundation interested in OER adoption in K-12 schools? So we're, at this point in time, primarily focused on higher education. I know that the governor's budget that was recently released actually had some funds for OER adoption within K-12. We are still in our very, very early stages of thinking about what our involvement in the K-12 space around OER would be. So I would say for this funding cycle, we'd probably not be interested in the K-12 space. Would existing efforts such as data/metrics, ASCCC adopting resolutions supporting inclusion of OER/ZTC be considered by the grant committee? Yes, I think so. And again, if there may be specifics that you want to follow up with me via email, but if there are already ongoing efforts to collect data around OER, but there is, a lack of resources around doing that, we would be happy to support that. OER, open educational resources, textbooks that are openly licensed, free, yes. Thank you, Ron, for providing that definition of OER. I probably should have done that at the start, so I apologize. Do you partner solely with organizations that work in college/higher ed, or do you also partner with orgs that work with younger students? Yeah, so again, I think I answered that in the previous question, but we are primarily focused on college/higher education. Thank you for this information. Projects focused on middle school teachers be considered, not affiliated with the university. Yeah, again, we would be primarily focused on higher education, and all of these questions are good feedback for me that I did not do a good job sharing that up front, so I apologize, but thank you for the questions. For resources to be considered as OER for this grant, are there specific licensing requirements like CC BY, et cetera? Yes, I mean, obviously, if we were to fund work, we would be very interested in having it, be released with a Creative Commons license of some sort. In terms of, which one, I think generally we are big fans of CC BY. Obviously we can have conversations just based on each proposal as to what would be, the most appropriate. But yeah, generally we are looking to have it, the work be released with a CC BY license. Do we fund K-12 work? At this point in time, we really don't do a lot in the K-12 space. LAO/application is geared towards organizations. Can faculty at colleges apply, or do we have to go through the colleges institute? So yeah, I would say that's a good question around, can faculty apply? Generally, we will fund through the college's foundation, but then earmark it for that specific faculty member's work. That was the case with the CSULB example, where it really was, a faculty and staff applying, but the foundation was sort of the vehicle. If that is not good for you all for various reasons, cumbersome, et cetera, I mean, we can be flexible. I think, we're much more interested in like the work as opposed to how we're going to fund it. We also are happy in our grant language to, limit or restrict, just depending on what would be best for you all, any sort of indirect costs, overhead that would need to be paid out. So yeah, if you have a specific question or example around that, happy to answer. Good morning. Just to confirm, the focus of the grant is to work with formerly incarcerated youth to attend a community college or certification program. I would say no, that is not the focus of this grant cycle. We have a Smart Justice initiative. That work, we will have a grant cycle for probably in the fourth quarter of this year. So definitely stay tuned for that. But this is primarily focused on open educational resources. Could you provide more information on the California requirement? Could a national OER consortium propose a project that includes California institutions and institutions from other states without necessarily giving a central role for California system, college, or university? Yeah, Rebecca, to that question, I think that we would be open to those types of proposals. That might be an opportunity for you and I to maybe connect offline, and you can share a little bit more information around what you're thinking about. But I think we would want to have some sort of impact within California. But yeah, would love to learn more about sort of what you're thinking and what role California would play within that. But it doesn't have to solely impact California, I guess. Roughly how many LOIs do you normally receive for Spark Grant funding rounds? It really varies. I would say we've kind of reached a sweet spot of 50-ish, 55-ish. We have not done an OER Spark Grant cycle before, though, so it's tough to evaluate. Like, we haven't done one solely focused on open educational resources. Early on in our process, we received like hundreds of proposals, and that's also one of the reasons why we decided to limit it to California, because that's where we are, that's where we're most knowledgeable about, and we just felt that there was a lot of energy expended on our process that could have been sort of spent anywhere, elsewhere, I should say, excuse me. But yeah, I would say generally 50, 55-ish or so. It sounds like Spark grants could support projects with broader impact. Though Ryan noted a focus this time around California. Should anyone with a broader focus submit an LOI, perhaps highlighting impact both in California as well as nationwide? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there is a broader impact project, but it's still going to benefit California, like we are interested in learning about those. Are nonprofits outside the United States with a 501c3 equivalency eligible to apply? So at this point in time, we are limited in our ability and can really only fund organizations that are based in the US with a 501c3. Where can the ISKME guidebook be found? That is a great question, and I will pull up the link and drop it in the chat, or at least one of them. Oh, and I see Cynthia is on the line, or at least she was, so maybe she can do the same. But let's see if I can effectively send out a message in the chat. There's one of the resources, and if you have time at the end, I'll search for the other one. Or Cynthia, if you're on and want to share them in the chat, that'd be great. For the Spark grant proposals that are part of larger projects, what considerations might we need to think about when the larger components have not been fully funded yet, and when the Spark grant would provide the opportunity to initiate core parts of the project while the grantees seek additional funding for subsequent components? Yeah, I think that's a great question, Cynthia. I would say that we would be really interested in learning the entire scope of the budget, so what you all think needs to be raised, and then also are there initial conversations ongoing? Who do you see as targets for those additional dollars to be funded? I would say that those are probably the things that would first come to mind. Sarah Harmon, when are the LOIs due? So we'll accept LOIs anytime between June 2nd and June 23rd. Our portal closes at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on June 23rd. Looking at the LOI doc, should this doc be used as a template? So yes, the document that is on the Spark Grant website, my goal in sort of providing that is those are the questions that will be in the portal. So don't feel the need to make something pretty with that document that is going to be then uploaded. They'll actually, it's like almost a Google form type. It is, there'll be individual fields that you'll enter the information in. But again, if you are looking to sort of get a head start and start drafting some of the responses, that is what that doc should be helpful for. What information would you say is crucial to include in your application? Again, I would say the most important information is one, what is the project? Two, what is the impact of the project? Three, how are you going to track the success of that impact? And then four, what is the timeline? And again, that's like that initial 500 words that we're kind of looking to see. Is the foundation interested in OER in languages other than English? Good question, Clara. Yeah, I mean, I think for the right project, we could be interested in that. If you want to reach out specifically via email and just share a little bit more, happy to provide some additional feedback. Does adult education fit into your definition of higher education? I'm guessing that this is probably some non-traditional education, perhaps, or education outside of like an institution of higher education. I would say we're probably generally focused more on sort of institution, higher education that occurs within, a community college, a university. But whoever asked that question, happy to, email me and I can respond a little bit more detail. Would a statewide discipline-specific professional development on OER, say OER PD for science faculty, be of interest to the committee? Yeah, I think that actually would be interesting. I think one of the things that we would want to consider is, why is that specific discipline one that should be funded amongst others? Like, what is the need that exists specifically for that discipline? But definitely something that I think would be interesting to consider. Would honoraria for professional development trainers be eligible for funding, or does it count as overhead? No, so staff time, and I apologize, I should have mentioned this earlier, but things like that where it's staff time or time to pay, work to be done, that is something that is totally appropriate for Spark grant dollars. Are there restrictions on how the funds may be used? For example, could staff time be included, or is it predominantly meant for tools for the project? Yes, so just answered that, but definitely, and again, I should have shared that previously, staff time is acceptable. Thank you for hosting the webinar. You're welcome. That was an easy question to answer. Is there an ideal timeline for the projects, i.e. completed within 6 months or a year's time? Yeah, so I think I might have mentioned this earlier. Generally, because we are kind of looking to spark something and to be a quick infusion of cash, we generally see projects within a 6 to 18 month time frame. I would say a year is sort of the sweet spot, but again, we're flexible. I would say, if really the fruits of the labor are going to be produced, past 18 months, it's probably not going to be as appealing to us, but again, happy to provide any additional feedback via email. Are there plans at the foundation to offer larger investments in OER? How can we stay in the loop? So at this point in time, the Spark Grant vehicle is the main vehicle that we have for deploying funds. I think, outside of that and larger investments, there probably won't be too many opportunities for that, at least probably within the next 12 to 18 months. I would say to stay in the loop, definitely everyone who's, if you want to email me, I can make sure that you are on our Open Educational Resources listserv and you'll get all those announcements. Also, happy to talk through, for this anonymous attendee, if there was something specific that you had in mind, maybe after the Spark grant cycle, because I'll be a little bit busy, but we can connect and just share that idea. And again, we also, want to be an opportunity to assist organizations in chatting with other foundations. So if it's not an appropriate, check size for us, we could, potentially steer you towards another organization. All right, we have a minute to go. I'm going to quickly look at the chat to see if there is any questions that weren't in the Q&A. So we answered the K-12 question. We answered the information is critical. We answered the language question. And we got one more question. This will be the final question I'm able to answer. Is there a limit to the number of for the participate on the project? I don't think so. I'm not quite sure what that question is getting at in terms of number of staff that are working on the project or the number of people who are impacted. But feel free to email me. I will drop my email in the chat, ryan@20mm.org. And yes, today's slides will be available for download, hopefully within the next 24 hours or so. Thank you all very much for joining. Really appreciate your time and attention today. Again, if you have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Definitely want to be a resource to you all. And yeah, we'll go from there. Thank you all. Have a great day.